di ba?
Yeah, it also Velasco to be felt
To maneuver more alliance for
process. He also basically
no?
it is.
Golden date is in
November 14 comes, kampante ka, that you got your allocation, you were heard, and so on. Then on
Mabigat yun, ha?
Pulse Asia survey in the specifically Marawi City.
magandang gabi po.
Salamat po sa
At tayo po ay ng cases dito sa Marawi City.
Yan ngayon, at probinsya.
And aside from that, medyo
ay
handy.
From the siege, di ba? Kumusta po yung mga capacity ng city? Halimbawa sa contact tracing, saka sa yung sa shelters po ng mga tao, marami pa ring displaced, hindi ba? Ano na po yung sitwasyon doon?
First, with regard to the question about yung status ng yung aming preventions, no, against itong paglaganap ng COVID-19. As to the contact tracing po, ay talagang we strengthen our contact tracing team. In fact, we also engage the BERT, yung mga Barangay Health Emergency Response Team. At ang ating mga personnel from the CHO, although talagang overwhelmed, we also hired additional personnel to be part of this contact tracing team. In fact, the BARM also hired the contact tracing team so that it can augment itong mga personnel natin sa city and other municipalities of Lanao del Sur. So, doon naman po sa ating yung sinabi po ninyo na hanggang ngayon na hindi pa po fully recovered ang ating syudad from the onslaught of the siege, ay talaga pong medyo nararamdaman din ang ating mga kababayan. Especially ang ating mga displaced mga displaced constituents. In fact, they are now staying at the temporary shelters na ginawa ho ng gobyerno. Yes, we are looking at them. Tinitingnan ho natin sila sa kanilang mga pangangailangan with the help of the local government and of course the national government. We're partners.
Mayor, kaya nga po ng sabi niyo, patong-patong na po yung problema. I-round out lang po natin, no, para lang po maano. Yesterday, we were speaking with the Department of Education on the opening of classes. Kinumusta namin yung meron bang outlier na regions. Hindi naman lang sinabing outlier itong BARM, pero sinabi nila, this is one of the blind spots for them. It's harder to monitor how it went in BARM. Ano po ang nangyari po sa opening of classes sa inyo?
Well, nagkaroon ho tayo ng maayos naman na opening of classes, but of course wala naman ho tayo talaga because of the directive from the national government, ang ating DepEd National na wala namang face-to-face classes at nagkakaroon lang ho ng online and ito pong paggamit ng mga modules. Ayun po ang ating ginagawa. Tumutulong po tayo sa DepEd. We supplied them some laptops and other school supplies dahil alam po namin na talagang kailangan nila with the itong bagong learning approach. So hindi ho talaga ganun kadali dito sa Marawi City, especially with the devastation of our schools at ang ating mga ibang facilities for education. So that we really need the support of the national government. At yan po ay aming panawagan na sana po ay patuloy ang kanilang suporta sa atin dito. And the local government unit of Marawi City, being the chairman of the local school board, ay tayo po ay tumutulong. Although not enough, no, to sustain the needs of our schools here in Marawi City.
Pero ganun po, para po maintindihan namin, more or less lang, ilang porsyento ng mga bata sa Marawi City ang nakapag back to school, whether through online or modular learning? Kumbaga, kasi nga, displaced yung iba nasa ibang mga bahay, iba nasa evacuation centers.
Medyo na-lessen po yung enrollees, no? But I do not have the exact figure, but I would say that based on the yung mga meetings na we conducted with the local school board, ay siguro bumabaho ng mga more or less nasa 20% out of the 100%, mga 80% siguro ang nakapag-enroll na. And of course, dahil sa existence of this MSCQ ay mas lalo pong medyo nag-slow down dahil another month pwede ho kaming medyo nag-slow down po yung ating pag-enrollment rate dito sa Marawi City and Lanao del Sur. So hindi pa po full blast because of the existence of the MSCQ. Probably by November ay hopefully bumabaho ang itong cases of COVID-19 dito sa Lanao del Sur and Marawi City.
Kumusta po ang testing dyan?
Yes. Meron po tayong fortunately dahil ho sa pagtutulungan ng province of Lanao del Sur and Marawi City, and of course the BARM also helped in the establishment of this biomolecular laboratory, ay tayo po ay nagkakaroon ho ng kapasidad para lahat ng mga suspected cases of COVID-19 ay nagkakaroon po tayo ng agarang testing. Kasi po dito ho sa Amaypak Medical Center ay meron ho tayong ganong facility na pinagtulungan po ng ating gobyerno.
So hindi naman yan po yung parang nangyari rito na dahil dumami yung tests, tumaas din yung number. It wasn't just a function of increased testing.
Well, those are possibilities, ma'am, no? Dahil siguro tumaas din nating kapasidad na yung magkaroon ng mga testing, and also people were also educated about this itong problema sa COVID-19. Naintindihan nila na dapat talaga mas maaga malaman. So marami hong nagpupunta ngayon sa hospital, even pagka nakakaramdam ng lagnat o ubo, ay talagang pumupunta. Before, marami pong nagtatago because of the stigma na pagka ikaw ay nagpo-positibo ay iba yung tingin sa iyo. Iyon ang kanilang pakiramdam. That's the reason why ang LG Marawi and other partners, even the province of Lanao del Sur, ay nagkaroon tayo ng massive information. For 1 month, umiikot ang ating mga personnel and telling people na talagang dapat ito po ay hindi natin dapat isabahala, and we have to let them know the observance of the minimum health protocols. At ito hindi nakakahiya, bagkus dapat isanggunin natin sa mga authorities pagka tayo nakakaramdam ng mga ganitong sakit.
Mayor, simula po nung siege, naghihirap ng Marawi, and you were having a hard time recovering actually, no? Dahil ang dami-dami pang sira, ang dami pang mga evacuees. Kumusta pa yung ekonomiya ng syudad ngayon? Paano pong kinabubuhay? Saan nyo nakukuha yung mga pondo ninyo ngayon? Kasi kailangan din maraming tulong yan eh.
Yes, yes ma'am. Fortunately po, tuloy-tuloy pa rin ang trabaho ng Task Force Bangon Marawi, and this is composed of several agencies of the government, 57 agencies of the government. That includes the LG Marawi. Ayan po ay nagtutulong-tulungan with the help of the national government and other partners, even private sector ay tuloy-tuloy pa rin po. At ngayon po, for the information of the public, ay nagsimula na po ang ating rehabilitation sa Marawi. Nagsisimula na po mga kalsada, eskwelahan, ang mga public market, barangay complex, and so on and so forth. At yun pong, yun naman po in terms of livelihood, I would say, kung isang manifestasyon po ang pag-recover ay yung pagtaas ng aming local revenue, I would say that dahil tumaas ang aming local revenue for almost 500 to 600%, I would say na medyo bumabangon po dito sa Marawi City.
Ano ang mga major sources of livelihood dyan ngayon?
Well, kung sa private po, marami muna tayong mga tindahan dito, marami tayong mga establishment. Doon naman po sa mga sources of livelihood, tumutulong din po ang ating national government through the DSWD, the DTI, and of course in terms of training, nandyan po ang TESDA. And all of these are converging para mas mapabilis po ang pag-ahon dito sa Marawi City. And yan po ay tinututukan ko bilang alkalde ng Marawi City, tinututukan natin nang sa ganon, itong mga suporta ng national government ay hindi mapawalang bahala at ito ay mapunta sa dapat mapuntahan. And rest assured ho na tayo po ay minomonitor natin ang ating mga different agencies of the government na nag-implement ng mga programa dito sa Marawi City.
Mayor,
Ano po yung
po that you sound very, very hopeful and very optimistic, and yung sabi niyo nga maraming then it's particularly, we'd like to really be hopeful alongside you precisely because ang daming pinagdaanan ng Marawi violence, extremism is always a challenge. But one of the things that we also know is that at the end of it, it's about poverty, it's about joblessness. Eh ngayon, nasa gitna tayo ng pandemya, we're still rebuilding the city, we're facing a lot of joblessness. How do you send a message to the youth of Marawi and Mindanao na kapit lang and there is still, as you say, this hope and things are actually looking up? How do you convince them of this?
Well, it's really very no, amazing dahil gaya po ng sinabi ko, ito po ay pwede natin nakikita no, pag nandito kayo sa Marawi na ang mga Maranao ay very resilient. Napakabilis ng ating pag-bounce back. Although it's really very yung test of one talagang na-siege ho kami 2017 and ito naman dumating naman itong pandemya na hindi pa naman fully recovered. But still, gaya ho ng sinabi ko, ang manifestation is that yung ating ekonomiya ay medyo tumataas. Marami tayong mga constituents dito na nagtatayo ng kanilang mga establishment. Ibig sabihin meron silang kumpiyansa na pwede pa rin bumangon ang Marawi City. So ang sa akin po, although this is my second term at ako po ay dumanas talaga ng big challenges because when I was first elected ay nagkaroon ng siege at ito naman po my second term ay nagkaroon ng pandemic. But probably because of the help of so many sectors ay medyo nakakaahon na rin ho sa kahirapan dito sa Marawi City.
Ang target date daw po ng rehabilitation sana completion ay December of next year, no? Sa tingin niyo po ba with the pandemic at the rate things are going, this will be pushed back further? And if so, ano po kaya ang bagong target? Meron ho bang napag-uusapan?
Well, despite the existence of the pandemic, hindi kasi tumigil yung paggagawa ng mga proyekto dito sa Marawi City. That's the reason why we are very positive. We are very positive na hindi po siya, kung may delays po ay siguro mga hindi naman masyadong mararamdaman, but continuous pa rin. In fact, sabi ko nga yung mga kalsada ay ongoing pa rin and mayroong binigay na timeline ang gobyerno that on or before December 31, 2021 ay magkakaroon ng makikita natin yung mga sinasabi natin na mga infrastructures na ginagawa dito sa Marawi City.
Oh, that's good to hear, huh?
Mayor, we haven't seen any recent video of Marawi City. Can you describe to us Marawi City now, especially main battle area? Are there people already there? Or have they begun building houses and establishments there, or it's still a war zone? I mean, it's still a badly lit war zone.
Wasteland.
Yes, sir. Some sector, because we have different sectors. We have Sector 1 up to Sector 9. Some sectors were allowed to go back, and they were given building permit to rebuild their houses. In fact, we already issued more than 1,000 building permit. But of course, yung sa mga individually, yung mga tao naman kasi hindi ganun kadali maggawa ng bahay, especially mga taga ground zero. And so probably they're also waiting for the itong pending na compensation bill sa both houses of Congress. Sana naman ay mapabilis because during the meeting with the President last March 4, 2020, he specifically said that he fully support itong pagbibigay ng compensation doon sa ating mga kababayan. Although we are really hoping na sana while they are also rebuilding the infrastructures, public infrastructures, but I hope that they can also help in rebuilding the private properties of our constituents na talagang tinamaan doon sa 24 barangays.
Yeah. Marami pa rin bang nasa tent nakatira, yung mga temporary housing?
Wala na po tayong tent ngayon, wala na po tayong mga tayo po yung ating mga constituents na bumalik po sa Marawi ay nasa mga transitional shelters. Ito po ay semi-concrete na mga bahay at ito po ay ginawa ng ating gobyerno. More than 4,000 na nagawa at yung ating mga kababayan na iba those who are allowed to go back, ay doon na ho sila naninirahan ngayon. Meron din hong ginagawa ang ating gobyerno ng mga permanent shelters na kung saan yung mga constituents natin na hindi na ho makakabalik sa kanilang dating tinitirahan because they were placed in the danger zone will be given a proper housing, ito permanent shelter sa Marawi City. At yun po ay ginagawa, ito po ay kompleto with complete facilities. Yan po ay ginagawa sa Barangay Kilala.
So hindi na di-delay ng pandemya, ha?
Hindi po nadidelay because as I've said, aside from the LG Marawi, ay talaga hong yung ibang ahensya ng gobyerno ay tinututukan yung mabilisan na pag-complete ng mga infrastruktura na ito. It is being led by the Task Force Bangon Marawi, and the chairman is the Secretary of the Housing and Urban Development, Secretary Del Rosario.
All right. Okay.
Okay. Well, Mayor Majul Gandamra, shukran po. Thank you for joining us tonight, and good luck, best wishes po sa inyong rebuilding efforts.
Thank you
Salamat po.
Maraming salamat po. Assalamualaikum. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you po. And we will just pause for a break, so please stay with us.
Welcome back to the Chiefs. We're now in the final stage of our conversation. And now joining us is Pulse Asia President, Mr. Ronnie Holmes. Good evening, Mr. Holmes.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening to everyone.
Chiefs. Yes,
Yeah,
of course.
Hi, sir.
Good evening.
Good
Good evening,
evening.
sir.
Magandang
Mr.
gabi.
Holmes, everyone's talking about your survey. Unang-una, it's the first since the pandemic on the performance of our officials. At pangalawa, into the fifth year of this president, and with all the criticism of the pandemic response, napakataas po yata, no? 91% yun ang sinasabi ng mga tao. Siguro we can start with the methodology. Siguro. Kung paano nangyari yan. Kasi ang sabi sa amin ay mahirap during the pandemic. It's really very difficult to conduct surveys in this pandemic.
Yeah, that's correct. It was difficult. That's why our initial 2 quarterly surveys had to be shelved. We were supposed to run a survey in March. The fieldwork was to start on March 15, but by that time, the quarantine was already imposed, first in Metro Manila and then the rest of Luzon. Then we missed also our second quarter survey, which should have been done sometime in June. So this is the first quarterly survey that we've done this year. It's face-to-face. In most of the areas in the country, that by the time we did the fieldwork, September 14 to 20, we're already in either GCQ or MGCQ. There were some places that we selected that were suddenly placed in ECQ, and we had to randomly substitute for those places. So that's a difficulty because and then the other difficulty also, I think many of you are familiar, is that meron mga lugar, there are places that you go to where the lockdown is not exactly that strict, but certain barangays actually impose their own sort of lockdown. So those are the difficulties that you see in the field, which we've never encountered before when we implement the same face-to-face interviews.
So wala namang impact yun on the sampling selection?
Ang ano dyan is that there's always a protocol that we use in terms of substituting for cities, municipalities, barangays, or even households. And that's a protocol that is always followed when it comes to substitution. And that has to be followed. And as much as possible, I mean, in all cases, the selection of the sample, the substitute must be done in a random manner. But it adds up to the difficulty in terms of conducting the survey. You always have to be alert, and we always have to find out essentially ano yung hindi mapasok. And this normally happened before, no, in conflict areas or even in areas which are hotspots when we do pre-election surveys, for example. But this is the first time, of course, under pandemic.
What instruments did you use? Was it a questionnaire with a chart? Can you describe to us the tool?
It's still the pen and paper, basically. We do have our show cards. Of course, the questions are read out by the interviewer. There are rating boards and show cards that are shown to the respondents. The show cards and rating boards can be held by the respondents, or they point to the show cards. We follow a health protocol, which is required actually by government, and you have to submit a health protocol. And the health protocol means that all of our interviewers would have to have their masks on, their face shield on, they have their sanitizer, and we also provide the same PPE to the respondents if they don't have it.
Okay, now, Mr. Holmes, ito, asking for a friend, asking for many friends, actually. What exactly was the question? How exactly was it phrased?
Ang pagkaka-phrase ng question is essentially the same question that we've asked in the past, no? Meron po, this is with regard to the performance rating. Meron ako ditong mga pangalan ng ilang mga kasalukuyang opisyal ng pamahalaan. Pakisabi nyo ang inyong opinion tungkol sa pagganap nila ng kanilang tungkulin itong nakaraang 3 buwan sa pamamagitan ng board na ito. Kayo po ba ay, then you read out the name of the person, Presidente Rodrigo Duterte, kayo po ba ay talagang aprobado, hindi masabi kung aprobado o hindi aprobado o talagang hindi aprobado. So it's the same question that we've run over the last 20 years with regard to approval. The same thing with regard to trust rating. We ask the same thing. Meron kami listahan dito ng mga opisyal, ng pamahalaan, pagsabi po kung kayo busang nagtitiwala, hindi masabi kung nagtitiwala o hindi nagtitiwala, up to lubusang hindi nagtitiwala. So that's the question that is asked for both the performance and the trust ratings.
Okay, now let's get into the results, because regardless of the skepticism of people with regards to the methodology, the reality is 91%, kahit ano pang margin of error mo dyan. I mean, the bottom line is very, very popular, very high approval ratings for President Duterte. Let's get into what you know, maybe inevitably some speculation as well. But what exactly is going on here? I mean, parang wala talagang tinag ang popularity and approval for President Duterte. What is factoring into that, especially in the middle of this crisis when it seems like even government was braced for bad news? I'm sure to a certain extent, even they are pleasantly surprised. But to what would you attribute itong resiliency ng popularity and approval for President Duterte?
Well, there are a number of things. So one is that we should recognize that in what is distinct with regard to the president right now, which I think previous President Aquino also enjoyed, is that from the very start they had high approval and trust ratings. In the case of President Duterte, his approval and trust ratings, if I'm not mistaken, was in the high 80s at the start. His trust rating in July 2016 was 91, exactly the same trust rating that he has right now. So he's basically carrying over a series of trust and approval ratings that were at the high side. Significant majorities approving of the president. Now, will that significant majority change their disposition towards their appreciation of the performance of the president or their trust of the president at a time when the country is faced with a crisis? Will they attribute whatever happens or consequences of the pandemic, will they hold the president accountable for that? I think that's the question here, right? And
Yes.
it shows, basically, the survey results show that they do not hold the president directly accountable for whatever have been the consequences of the pandemic.
Kumbaga,
There could be
hindi niya makasalanan ng COVID, kumbaga. The bottom line.
Hindi niya kasalanan yung pagiging yung pandemic in the first place dahil global naman yan. Ang pananaw ng karamihan diyan, ang marami diyan na nagsasabing aprobado, nagtitiwala sa Pangulo, naniniwala sila na ang Pangulo ginawa niya ang kanyang tungkulin. Nagsagawa siya ng quarantine o tinatawag na lockdown, nagbigay siya ng social amelioration support. The social amelioration support came in 2 rounds, right? At the time that we conducted the survey, we should also note this down. Many of the places in the country were already in MGCQ and GCQ. So kumbaga, nakahinga na yung mamamayan doon sa mahigpit na lockdown ng unang buwan. Sa maraming bagay ka maaring banggitin, ang pandemya ay global at maaring ang mga tao alam nila na sa ibang lugar, pareho rin ang kaganapan. Malala rin ang sitwasyon, marami rin na walang trabaho, marami rin na nagugutom. Sa ating bansa, maaaring naniwala sila, nabaltaan nila na dahil sa paghihigpit ay hindi masyadong lumaki ang bilang ng COVID. There are a number of things that we can say if we just simply track the developments, but definitely with the performance and trust ratings, they're not holding the president directly accountable.
Yes, sir. But I suppose some people are wondering how he was able to sustain these high numbers, given the fact that he would only appear once a week and very, very late night, very, very late Monday nights pa. What we usually do hear from or see are his lieutenants. Does that mean that yung actions ng kanyang lieutenants that helps to beef up the president's performance ratings?
Well, it's not so much that, Ed. I think it would really be, and it's something that we should actually be able to study. What have been the reports about the president's activities and actions during the pandemic? As when we do our surveys, we normally ask what's the primary source of news of respondents, and the primary source still is television. In this survey, for example, 84% will say that their primary source is television. What I'm not familiar with, because I have not been tracking it, is essentially the type of news reports about the president on television. I do see on social media a number of criticisms being leveled against the president, but social media as a source of news is quite insignificant relative to television and radio as the primary source of news. So whether if social media is full of criticisms, and there are basically two types of exchanges there, right? For or against. And to a certain extent, we know that those are echo chambers of certain groups. What about television, which is the primary source of information? Have they dished out direct criticisms against this president compared to former presidents? All of you have been monitoring former presidents in the past. We're basically in the same generation. This president has relatively been free from the same direct criticism that former presidents have experienced.
Okay, there's another interesting aspect of your survey, no? Since you're talking about criticism, bakit si Vice President Leni Robredo, people are asking about it. Medyo mababa yata yung kanyang survey. Consistent ba yun?
1% down.
Oo, 1% down. Pero considering that she has taken a high profile, because you're talking about TV, radio, she has a regular radio show. At okay naman yung mga sinasabi din niya, although, siyempre, sinasagot siya lagi ng Malacanang. And to what do you credit this, the result of your survey with regard to the Vice President?
But is that even significant, the 1%?
It's not significant because if a change is significant only if it's more than basically more than
3,
almost
right?
6 percentage points. 6 percentage from survey to survey. So a 1 percentage point difference is not exactly a significant change in this regard. Well, in the case of Vice President Robredo, if we compare her to all former vice presidents, we will also understand why her ratings are not as high as those that, let's say, for example, the president is getting. Number one, unlike former vice presidents, if you would remember, the previous vice president, Vice President Binay, had performance ratings that were very close or even higher than the performance rating of President Aquino, Noynoy Aquino. The main reason for that is because she held not just one, but 2 portfolio positions. right?
Yes, yes, right.
About
OFW.
Vice
Yeah.
President Robredo, she was originally in the cabinet but was eased out. And from that time, all the
Okay.
basically the accusations and criticisms coming not only from the lieutenants of the president, but even from the president himself.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay. How
now,
much does yeah? How much is it frozen or what? Yeah, okay. How much does awareness of the official uh, play into the response? For example, you were saying that Supreme Court Chief Justice Peralta scored the lowest among the top positions, no, in government. Uh, Mainly because people really don't know him. How much of that is a factor? Because then we can probably connect it to exposure, right?
yeah, it's Lucia, it's not just awareness because when we talk about awareness, the question that we have with regard to awareness is whether you've heard, watched, listened to something about this person.
Yeah.
But it's the degree of extent of information that you have about what the person is doing, the complexity of the work of that person. Across the years, we've always had more indecision with regard to the performance and trust ratings of chief justices, except that when the chief justices are on center stage. Meaning to say, for example, Chief Justice Davide, when he was presiding over the Senate impeachment court, basically had higher approval and higher trust because he was really the one presiding over the impeachment. He was getting more press, more media at the time. On the other hand, if you recall, at the time when Chief Justice Renato Corona was facing his own impeachment, that was the time
Yes.
when his approval and trust ratings declined. So, but outside of those two episodes, basically, how many people really follow what's happening in the Supreme Court?
Hmm.
Uh, so that's
Right.
that's one thing.
Yes.
It brings it back to the question of Ami earlier. Why is it that Vice President Robredo's ratings are not that high,
Despite
despite the
the
fact
resume program.
Hmm.
despite the fact that she started off with distributing PPEs? I know she had a
Hmm.
shuttle for frontliners. My question
And
is
our own
again,
sonas.
because I have not in any way tracked how much of those initiatives have really been projected in media. And by media, I mean all forms of media,
Okay.
relative to the projection of the initiatives or interventions of, let's say, the president, or for that matter, even local government officials.
Mr. Holmes, just to bring it back to Mr. Duterte before we let you go. Malinaw naman po yung sinabi niyo. I mean, there are certain things, the big pictures here, COVID, to an extent, the economic recession caused by COVID, mukhang hindi yan binabaling ng mga tao sa presidente. A lot of it was really out of his control. But what about the things that were in his control and not in the context of COVID? For example, in the past months, PhilHealth, corruption in PhilHealth, a lot of question about the competency of some cabinet members, particularly the DOH, not taking action there. And then for that matter, ABS-CBN. That was a popular issue. It seemed to be something that people could understand. What does the high approval ratings for President Duterte mean with regards to these issues that, in fairness, he did have more control over?
Yeah, Robbie, I understand. Let me begin with ABS-CBN. The way that he framed the ABS-CBN shutdown was us against them again. His normal populist rhetoric. So his attack on oligarchs, remember? That was how he started in his State of the Nation address. So that is the one that has actually generated support from him, even during the campaign. And he sustains that particular rhetoric up to the present, right? The last thing that we heard yesterday was the reports that I saw today, he was asking a company to give for free the cars that are used, no, for transportation, for buses. And that's the type of us against them angle that Duterte has exploited. The president has exploited from the very start. Now, with respect to the, as you point in your words, the incompetence, then the corruption that is happening to around the president or below the president, we've had presidents in the past who have not also been affected by the ineptitude, incompetence, or the corruption that involves their subordinates. except when they themselves, their own personal integrity is put into question.
Mm.
Okay.
They are
Yeah,
not
that's my message.
directly affected.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Ronald Holmes of Pulse Asia, maraming salamat po. And now,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you po.
Thank you, sir.
Maraming salamat. Good evening.
and
Keep safe.
now, yeah, but please stay there. We're continuing this discussion. Joining us now is Professor Antonio Contreras of De La Salle University. Professor, welcome to the Chiefs.
Magandang gabi po. And thank you for
Hi,
having me.
sir.
Dini, sir.
Hello. Hi, Luchi. Long time.
Mm,
no
bro.
see.
Professor, I trust you've been listening in on the conversation with Mr. Holmes, and like
Yeah.
everybody else, you are up to speed with the results from Pulse Asia. We'll let you jump in immediately. Any reactions to the survey and Mr. Holmes' insights on it?
Well, the result of the survey is really, surprising to many people. I think even the palace is somewhat surprised about it because it comes at the time when there are so many crises. The country is facing crisis. Ang daming problema. Sabi niyo hindi lang COVID, andyan yung PhilHealth, andyan yung ABS-CBN. Dito na lang sa COVID, kung titingnan mo yung nangyari sa ibang bansa, if you look at the other countries, almost every leaders have suffered in terms of ratings. Yet in the Philippines, we have 91%. So for me, the question that should be raised is that it is not just about the president who should be asking. Yung meron sa presidente, bakit ganon? We should also be asking what is in us as a people. I think it's not just about measuring the president. It's about the kind of culture, the kind of political culture we have.
Yes.
The way we look at our politicians, the way we look at our leaders. I think it is more important because yun ang napapabayaan. Masyado tayo nakatutok sa survey.
Yeah, Mr. Contreras, I'll seize on that. Pasensya na. I'll jump on that because I did want to ask also. You said it's about us, di ba?
Yes po. Yes po.
Could you reconcile this for me? Because on the one hand, as you said, maraming nagugulat. But if you take the survey as reliable, 91% have approval rating. So why is anybody even surprised if 9 in 10 of us supposedly approve and trust the president? So how do you aside lang, no? Hindi mo na sa survey. How do we reconcile the behavior of people and the thinking of people when 9 out of 10 of them would actually say, oh, mataas ang approval, tapos paglabas ng survey, magugulat sila? How do you
Robbie,
reconcile?
baka ikaw yung one. Baka ikaw yung one.
No, but I'm talking about the 9. Precisely, I'm talking about the 9. Di ba?
Yeah.
I'm all good faith that this is a reliable and a professional survey. But if 9 out of 10 approve, then why are so many people surprised?
Well, actually, kung titingnan mo yung 9 out of 10 approve, actually 5 out of 10 lang yung disapprove kasi yung 0.5 nga hindi makadecide. So well, ang sinasabi ko lang ganito yung pagkagulat kasi as a social scientist, siyempre titingnan mo yan. Bakit ganyan? And ang kulang kasi sa ginagawa natin sa ngayon, wala tayo yung tinatawag namin sa social research sa focus group discussion na mas palalalimin mo pa kasi hindi mo mapuprove. Kasi nakikita natin yung figures na ganito, 9 out of 10, yun yung survey. But anong pinanggalingan yan? And when I teach my students about social research, I always tell them that the survey is as good as the question asked. And so if the question that was asked is just approval in general, then that is totally different from asking the respondent approval on certain aspects. Like approval on the way he handled COVID, approval on he handled lockdown. Doon mababago yung kanilang perspective. Kahit tayo, sumasagot tayo ng tanong, kung ano lang yung tanong, yun ang sasagutin. So the result of the survey is generic. It's about approval ratings, approval and trust of a president. Pero hindi natin nahihimay ano yung mga aspeto ng kanyang performance. And the job of the president is a very complicated one. The issues that we're confronting is a very complicated one. It could have been different if we asked questions in terms of his performance, in terms of COVID, his performance in terms of the ABS-CBN issue. Pag inisa-isa mo na yun, baka nagkaroon tayo ng iba-ibang variation. Maring hindi mo ba?
Pero
So wait.
di ba
Di ba automatic dapat yun? I mean, pag tinatanong ka, what do you think, how do you think these government officials perform? Hindi ba yung situation mo at the moment would have a bearing on your response, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So,
When you interpret it already, then dapat maging cautious ka. Kasi may mga tinatawag tayong mga nuances ng questioning. Lalo na kung hindi natin kasi alam ano yung kondisyon, lalo na may pandemic. Paano pumunta yung enumerator doon sa lugar o yung nag-question, ano yung context, anong oras. Maraming ganyan sa social research na dapat mong take into consideration, lalo na sa ditong sitwasyon na meron tayong pandemya. So, ang rigor ng research o ng survey na andun, and I trust Pulse Asia to have the expertise and experience in doing this. But what is now the challenge is for us to probe further and deeper. Bakit ganun? At may mga tentative na sagot dyan na hindi pa rin naman napuprobe. Pero may mga haka-haka na ang ibang mga analyst. For example, narinig natin yung explanation ng populism. Masyadong populist ng president. And because he's a populist, people will tend to approve what he does regardless, no matter what. Parang ang metaphor nga, parang ama mo. Alam mong flawed yung ama. Maraming bisyo ng babae. Pero yung pamilya nakaharap sa krisis. Pag may isang estranghero magtatanong sa'yo, gusto mo ba yung ginagawa niya? Siyempre, mag-iba yung pag-iisip mo, hindi mo sisiraan yung tatay mo. May mga ganong klase ng approaches sa political psychology na kailangan natin tingnan. Na hindi natin nahihimay dahil na-consume na ngayong oras natin doon sa pag-interpret ng macro numbers, yung macro figures, which is also factual. But paano mo yung palalimin? Ay hindi pwedeng gawin yun ng isang survey. You have to do a lot of qualitative approaches like focus group discussions, more focus key informative reviews, para mas maintindihan natin saan ba nanggagaling itong ganitong mga
So kung kayo ang tatanungin, Professor, can you craft a better question? Something that can bring out a more nuanced answer that can give you a better pulse? So what would be a better question?
I would have broken down into specific aspects of governance in terms of the pandemic, in terms of and then sa pandemic, road nun, yung quarantine, yung mas specific na para talagang klaro na ano yung gusto nila. Kasi package yan, may mga nagugustuhan ka, may mga hindi ka nagugustuhan. Gusto mo siya doon sa isang aspeto, hindi mo siya nagustuhan. Pero pag tinanong ka na ng buo, parang sa restaurant yan, kakain ka sa restaurant, sarap ba doon? Okay. Pero pag inisa-isa mo na yung putahe, iba na yung opinion mo.
How do you square
given
the...
you significantly different numbers, if you broke it down into specific issues, would you get significantly different numbers?
Oh, well, I don't know about that. I don't want to preempt. But it could have been, it could have provided us a much more precise and specific.
He's a populist. Kaya yung kahit anong response niya will be, popular. Kaya lang, the survey has also started discussions on another topic related, yung election. Ano yung magiging impact neto if you have this very popular populist president? Will he be able to carry this over to the elections, considering that we're still in the middle
Is it too early?
And it will persist until next year.
Well, one thing that I can at least hypothesize is that the president seems to be isolated from his government in terms of when he's being assessed. Kanina sinabi ni Dr. Holmes na parang Teflon. Siguro pag pinag-usapan yung corruption sa DOH, bini-blame sa DOH yan, hindi sa kanya. Pagdating sa ABS-CBN, sa Congress yan ina-associate, hindi sa kanya. So hindi sa kanya, wala siya accountability. So parang separate siya kasi nga masyadong personalistic yung pagtingin sa kanya. So ang tingin ko, kung ito ay transferable, matatransfer niya ba yan to someone else?
Yes.
Doon sa for me, I don't think so. I don't think it's transferable. I don't think it's transferable. The president, like for example, people when they are surveyed, they don't like China, right? The president
yes.
To China,
Right.
friendly to China. So you see that disparity, kung consistent ang tao mag-isip, ayaw na rin natin sa kanya kasi ayaw natin sa China. But in that particular result, you can see the divergence.
So you're saying yung mga issues that are being raised against him might go against whoever he endorses. Kasi yun ang pinag-uusapan ngayon eh. Napakasikat na itong presidente to. Kaya ba niya mag-endorse ng kapalit niya? Will it trouble?
Well,
You're saying na mga issues na which are rubbing away, hindi dumidikit sa kanya. Didikit sa kanyang kandidato.
Well, unfortunately, Filipinos do not vote on issues, on the basis of issues. So whoever is going to be anointed will be judged as a different narrative. I think that's how people look at the president. He's being seen as a narrative. He's being seen as a symbol and image. And politicians in the country are seen as narratives. The better narrative you have, the much more exciting the story that you have. Tinitingnan nun saan ka nang galing. Exciting bang narrative mo? Hindi natin pinag-uusapan kung ano yung stand mo sa issues eh. So, kaya nga mas madaling i-isolate o separate from each other kasi magkakaibang kwento.
Mm-hmm. How do you square this with the survey that show that Filipinos are feeling poorer, especially in this time? So they feel poorer, but at the same time, they're still loving this president. Paano ma-explain yun?
Kasi ayoko sanang gamitin yung word na kulto. Pero parang, in a way, nagiging parang cult yung pagfa-follow sa presidente to the point that he becomes an ideology himself. That way, if you look at him, he is someone that is an image or a symbol that is judged no longer on the basis of what he does, but on the basis of what he symbolizes. He symbolizes kasi he came into the political landscape as someone who is an embodiment of the anger and the frustrations of people because of their being excluded by elite democracy and by elite politics. And he's seen like that. You know, he's seen as an outsider. He's seen as hindi social, palamura. He's like every person on the street. He can associate. He's one of them, one of us. So that what was mentioned by Ronnie, the us versus them narrative. So he's being seen as part of us. Tayo, sa atin. So yun ang tinitingnan ng bayan. So, parang siya, his power emanates not from his actions. Kaya di ba tinanong nyo kanina, hindi naman siya nakikita ng tao, gabi na siya mabigyan ng press conference.
Once a week.
Once a week.
Replay naman.
Hindi naman.
Halos madaling araw.
It's a replay.
Hindi naman yun na nagmamatter eh. Wala sila, ang tao, maaaring ako, hulak. Hindi lang tinitingnan si Duterte yan. Whatever he does, whatever he's going to say, it's going to be for us. It's almost like an addict, not yung word addiction, but it very much like ang pagiging fanatic mo sa isang.
Parang blind faith.
Yung pagiging fan.
The president was also criticized in some of his statements na yung lagyan mo ng gasolina yung mask and so on. Some of these controversial statements made by the president parang hindi dumikit when you look at the survey.
Yeah. Nasasakyan siguro nila.
But Professor Contreras, I mean, it goes back to my point. 9 out of 10, it takes us beyond the realm of what we stereotypically imagine of a Duterte supporter. 9 out of 10 brings in A, B, C, D. I mean, it's not just C, D, E. Kasama dyan ang A and B. Mataas ang ratings across all demographic segments.
Maybe, Robbie, what we should need to do is maybe we social scientists and you guys in the media should begin looking deeper into the social psychology and political psychology of the people. That maybe there are many things that we should study more, understand. And I think in terms of my discipline like political science, we tend to be very much focused on institutions and structures. Ang political culture o cultural politics, hindi masyadong pinag-aaralan kasi hindi sexy. But I think it's about time that we need to understand that we have to understand the underbelly of our people, of our political landscape. Because I think that's something that we need to. 9 out of 10 is really surprising. But if we have been surprised,
and at the time of pandemic,
we have been but we have to understand. That's why it's about time that we have to really change the way we look at them. Parang hindi na ito kababalaghan. This is reality. So you have to go into the reality so that we can begin to understand maybe how to change this. Kasi Kasi this is something that is there. I'm not, he started, sabi nga ni Dr. Holmes kanina, Duterte started with a very huge popularity capital.
But Professor, what do you say to your friends who cannot believe this? Because ang reactions ngayon is, hindi ako naniniwala dyan, di ba? Tinotroll ng mga tao yung Pulse Asia mismo. And sinasabi na. But what do you tell them? That if you want to change and to understand the real politics and the politics in the Philippines right now, if you want to understand what's going to happen in 2022, do you tell them na, no, you take this as a given, or do you say that you're right, wag kayo maniwala sa survey?
I always tell them na, we have to begin to understand how the people think and where they're coming from. Kasi naunahan tayo ng bias eh. Of course, many people who of course complain are the people who don't like the president, right? Of course, if you like the president, then you also would say it's okay. Pero ang problema kasi ang polarization kasi ng bansa is so divided, but it's so uneven. There's a divided country, but it's not in the middle. Parang ang dami dito, na 90% yung 10% each other, but it's very divided. One side will never understand the other. So I think it's about time that we need to do more. And I think more objective analysis of what's happening instead of calling them idiots and irrational people. Maybe we should be starting to be more understanding in terms of just not understanding, maintindihan sila, kundi intindihin din sila. Inquire into why they're doing that. Kasi yun ang nauna, yung mga bobo yung mga yan, irrational yung mga DDS yung mga yan. Yun ang mga DDS, ang tingin naman dito sa elitista yan. So there is this partisanship that unfortunately also go deep into the academia. Even academics, gano'n din. Academics, may mga biases din. So sa halip na aralin ng maigi at objectively yung phenomenon, paunahan ng bias.
Right.
Okay. Professor Antonio Contreras of De La Salle University. Sir, maraming salamat po for joining us tonight.
Thank you, sir.
Maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Okay.
Naniniwala.
Si Robbie, siya yung one nga doon. Tsaka yung friends niya. Sila yung 1%.
Actually, 0.5 nga eh.
Pala 0.5.
5% undecided.
Yeah, pero di ba? Either hindi ka maniwala or you're not being honest with yourself, because unless all, you're right, unless all our friends are in the 10%. Diba? But that's a real reality. That's a real question that people will have to confront. Diba? It's possible that you're all in the 10%.
Eto na lang, hindi ka miyembro ng kulto. Yun na yun.
Delikado yung mga ganyang hirit. Si Lucy yun.
Parang kulto.
But you have to face it. He's not the first Teflon president we've had.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember.
Teflon for a while.
Yeah, yes. and era was Teflon, huh?
Yes.
According to the last few months,
GMA,
he was
for a certain period, si GMA. And this is not the first time he got a 91% popularity.
Yeah.
Sabi niya,
parang carryover na eh.
I know, but it's COVID time. That's why
Yes,
it's
COVID
really
time.
surprising.
But Ronald Holmes gives a very, very compelling point there. COVID is beyond everybody's, if you're expecting people to blame him for the pandemic, it's easy to understand when people say, pero hindi naman niya kasalanan yung crisis. Buong mundo nga, Amerika nga, nagkakagulo. Diba? So parang, the point is, it actually, on a certain level,
it's easy to blame other people, like, for example, Secretary Duque.
Yes, but yun nga yung tanong natin, di ba?
Yun na nga.
Okay, we're going over time.
Okay.
Let's call it a night, and tomorrow is a hump day.
Yes.
And that will be all for this Tuesday edition of the Chiefs. We hope we'll discuss it. We'll keep the conversation going. I'm Edwin Gaupan News.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star. Nawala si break.
Si Lucy Cruz Valdez po of News 5, and I'm Robbie Lampay. We are One News.